You're listening to Outlook, the home of extraordinary personal stories on the BBC World Service. I'm Emily Webb. So first up, we do normally ask our guests to introduce themselves, but I suppose for you, you've had quite a few names, haven't you?
Yes. So we have born as Andrew Ben Shenton, change April 76 to Benjamin Saul Hamilton Byrne, and then Benjamin Andrew Shenton.
If you met Ben Shenton as he's known today, you'd never guess his past. He's in a marriage that's lasted more than 2 decades. He has 2 children and a stable job. But he had a very strange upbringing. He had little contact with people outside his then family, which was made up of many children, sometimes up to 28, and so-called aunts and uncles. They lived within the confines of their sprawling property in rural Victoria, outside of Melbourne, Australia, but he was allowed to access the outside world through books.
Very much so. Books were brought in for us, and I would bury myself in those.
In particular, Ben was fascinated by history books, those on World War II. He related to them as a child and even started calling the property where he lived the concentration camp.
That was the nickname we gave the place. We were living behind barbed wire fences. The aunts and uncles were the guards, and the all-powerful owner, which was Anne and Bill, and it just was a nickname that stuck that retrospectively sort of has the imageries.
The Anne he's referring to is Anne Hamilton Byrne, and Bill is her husband. For more than 50 years, she ran a cult in Australia called The Family and was seen by her followers as the reincarnation of Jesus Christ. When it was uncovered, people were horrified.
Police later found 14 children had been brought up in almost complete isolation. It was also alleged they'd been half-starved, beaten and forced to take large quantities of tranquilizers and even fed LSD.
Picture this, Anne, a glamorous, beautiful, charismatic woman who promoted intense yoga and meditation. The fundamental belief of the family was that the world as they knew it was going to end, and the followers would have to re-educate the survivors. Many of the children, now adults, have spoken of the cruel treatment they received growing up in the cult. And a warning, what Ben will discuss can be extremely difficult to hear. Anne Hamilton Byrne was seen as the almighty ruler of the family. To Ben, she was mum. The photos of the children from the 70s and 80s when Ben was growing up are quite disturbing. They were often dressed in matching outfits compared to that of the Von Trapp family in The Sound of Music. Many of them had bleached blonde hair.
Most of us had I guess you'd call it the bob haircut, dressed in velvets, tartans. There was quite a bit of money, I guess. It tended to match, so it was very much the case of almost a uniform.
You're now going to hear Anne herself explaining to an interviewer why she dressed the children in that way.
I wanted them to look like brothers and sisters, though. I must admit this. I love them. I love them in their little smocks and jeans and the long hair and ribbons. It was beautiful. It was lovely to see.
Why did you start to take in the children?
I love children.
Anne Hamilton Byrne lived abroad a lot of the time, occasionally visiting the Victorian property where the family lived. Ben says that life there was extremely regimented, early starts and a sparse vegetarian diet. Throughout the day they'd be homeschooled and do sessions of yoga and meditation, overseen by the aunties.
They were very loyal to Anne. They would spend 2 weeks down living in their own homes, working, and they would come up the other 2 weeks and look after us.
It also sounds as though they were very strict. What would be the consequences for you, for the children, if you did misbehave?
And they were in a rule book that Anne would sign off, and they ranged from writing thousands of lines, missing out on days at a time of meals, beltings. There were times where there was dunking in water to the point of almost asphyxiation. There was holding the hand of people over candles to the point where watching it was enough to leave some serious emotional scarring.
And what sort of environment would that create for you and for the other children?
It is naked fear. You don't know when it's going to occur, and you have to come up with coping mechanisms to handle that. That can be played out through repeating it yourself, dog eat dog, subversive behaviour where you're hiding. Considering there was between 14 to 28 of us, you got the whole gambit.
And when you say dog eat dog, how would that play out in your own life?
I was one of the ones that worked out, okay, the way I'm going to survive is to be, you use the inverted commas, the class snitch.
And that happened with you and with your younger brother, is that right?
Yes. He would suffer with asthma, so he was pretty much sneezing and coughing 24/7, and at times he'd be put outside to go to sleep, which was horrific. As inverted commas brothers, we would compete with one another. I would get very annoyed with him, very angry, and wait until he did something and just tell on him, knowing what the consequences were, that he'd be locked away in the bathroom and life would be very difficult for him. So I was able to use the abuse came from elders to not have to physically do anything myself, but exact some pretty cruel punishment on him. It took me a long time to eventually come around to asking for his forgiveness. We were both adults, and he's graciously understood where that had come from, but you have to live with that stuff.
And what that environment did mean, what that sort of system meant, is that there wasn't that much closeness between you. You were all sort of very individual, and it wasn't a group.
That's right, and did not allow anyone to form close relationships. She wanted the only affection and all the affection, so as soon as they saw any level of bonding happen, we were very quickly separated.
So this is Anne Hamilton-Burm, who was obviously the head of the cult. She was the head of the family. She and her husband would be abroad a lot. They did a lot of travelling. But what would it be like when they were back with you all?
Almost like the rock star coming home. They're very excited, yet at the same time there was also great fear. We'd often ask, is she in a good mood or a bad mood? And a bad mood meant all hell breaking loose. You know, she was only too happy to use her stiletto heel on us.
It's a really brutal image. She beat you with a stiletto heel.
Yeah, that would happen at times, as well as whatever else came to hand.
And when she was in control of her temper, she presented this very sort of glamorous, very charismatic facade, didn't she?
She was very charismatic, had a lot of plastic surgery, dressed well, and then had a charisma, an air about her, a spirit to her that really drew people in.
You grew up believing that she was your mum.
Yes.
Everybody thought that she was their mum. In light of that, how did you feel towards her? What sort of emotions did you have towards her?
When you create a reality for a child, they have no reference points. So she presented herself, everyone spoke of her as our mother, and so that was mum. That's what mums do. So I had no other people, in inverted commas, at school that you would normally go to when you're growing up in society and go, hang on, your mum's like this, my mum's like that, what's wrong? There was no competing narrative.
One of the things that Anne did do was that she gave her followers prescription drugs, or she gave them hallucinogens. Did she ever give you drugs when you were a child?
Yes, I very much remember Mogadon, Valium and the likes of that, to the point where I was extreme, and a lot of us were very photosensitive. Out in the sunlight, it was extremely painful. There are sedatives, some of the stuff we were given with that as the side effect. So at the time, we just grew up not knowing anything different. We were probably in some level of a suppressed drug state. And then when you turned 14 through to 16, boy or girl, then it was the psilocybin and then it was the LSD.
Anne called the LSD taking clearings, believing they would induce religious experiences. Many of the members of Anne's cults were doctors, nurses, psychiatrists, lawyers. Their respectable day jobs hid the reality of what was actually happening. Plus, they were medical professionals who could administer the drugs, and they controlled a private mental health hospital for some time where people were subjected to these clearings. When you were growing up, did you ever question why you were living in that way?
No, because there was no other option. You would question if you knew there was another avenue. It just was life.
How did you treat outsiders? What were you told to say to outsiders?
So the motto Anne ran by was unseen, unheard, unknown. And it was very much a thing of you do not tell any outside person who's not a sect member anything, to the point where if I did have any interaction with them, I would check through what I said to make sure that I hadn't revealed anything. We were grilled what to say, and grilled is the word. You would be told, they'd then ask the questions, you'd relate back, they'd correct you, so it was very controlled what you would say, what you were allowed to say and what you weren't allowed to say, and if any infraction, you would be punished.
Then came a day that would change everything, the 14th of August 1987. In the run-up, 2 of the girls from the cult had escaped and gone to the police to tell them about the emotional and physical abuse. They wanted to get the other children out. So that day, over 100 officers descended on the property. But when Ben heard a commotion in the hallway, he didn't realise or understand what was about to happen.
This was, in a sense, always going to be an unusual day. Bill Hamilton Byrne had literally come back from England, and he was spending a 6-week period with us. So that day was going to be a special picnic. At 7:30 in the morning, when we heard the running down the stairs, obviously thinking that's the aunts, it's time to finish Hatha Yoga and the meditation, and the day's about to start. It proved to be very, very different when the doors burst open and there were these very unfamiliar faces.
And did you have any idea who those people were?
Absolutely none. Didn't take long. They said they were the police. They were actually there to rescue us, and my file for police, as Anne had told us many times, they'll take you in a bag and throw you into the lake and beat you up. So I wasn't overly thrilled with this.
So you actually physically fought back?
Yeah, I did. It was just absolutely not holding on to the balustrade at the top of the stairs, not wanting to be removed and having to make a decision, what am I going to do? Very quickly went with them, and as we drove away, I remember being in the car saying, well, that's the closing of a chapter. Pages turned and the beginning of another one.
Police are trying to establish the identities of 6 children they have plucked from the bush hideaway of a secretive pseudo-religious sect. On Friday morning, police seized a number of prescription and non-prescription drugs of dependence, passports and photographs.
Dazed, the children were taken to a home for boys and girls in Melbourne. And when did someone tell you that Anne Hamilton Byrne wasn't actually your mother?
I think it was done on that day. We were very much then expecting, well, who is our mum and dad? And I was able to very quickly dump Anne was my mum incredibly fast.
Really?
Yes.
So it made sense to you immediately?
It did, to sort out that Anne was a fake and wasn't real, just worked for me.
Even though you were relieved to leave, what is it like as a 15-year-old to be told that your whole life, your whole reality, was actually a cult?
I mean, you say 15, I thought I was 14. So my age changed, my name changed. Yes, they're calling it a cult. I'm now trying to work out, well, this world I'm in, what are its rules? How do I function? What do I do? So I set my attention not so much to I've lost something, but what is the world I'm living in? What are the rules that it exists by?
Tell me about how you were feeling that night when you went to bed.
So as the motto goes, unseen, unheard, unknown, we'd been very much schooled into not saying anything that was incorrect, lying there thinking, what have I said? And then realising I don't have to do this anymore. I think for the first point in my life I realised I'm set free, I'm out of jail. I can start life new, I don't have to do this anymore.
As the investigation continued, things started to become clearer, like how all these 28 children had come into Anne's care thinking she was their mum. The 1960s was a time where there were more unwanted pregnancies, and Anne took advantage of this. She illegally adopted children born out of wedlock and even asked some of her 500 followers to hand over their own babies. A researcher was tasked with figuring out the real parentage of the children, including Ben.
In the interim, every woman around the age of 40, I'm thinking that could be my mum that I'd see walking the streets. So he lays out the documentation in front of me. It was not the best days of my life, to say the least. Before me, suddenly, I'm reading the deed polls here. My name changed from Andrew Ben Shenton to Benjamin Saul Hamilton Byrne, and my mother, a name changed from Joy Ethel Movitz, transferred to Joy Trevelyan.
And you actually knew her?
And I knew her. She was one of the aunts.
Joy, Ben's real mother, wasn't taking care of children at the property, but her path had crossed with her sons. Mainly, he knew her as the person who would block him from travelling with Anne, and in fact, he hated her. After he found out that Joy was his real mother, she rang him up on the telephone.
My mum would get this voice that would channel what Anne had told her, and in that voice, she imparted to me, "Ben, you're an embarrassment to me. Don't bother ever turning up on my doorstep. I'll slam the door in your face." So I guess it meant that I wasn't going to be involved with the cult, didn't it? It shut off what could have been a wonderful possibility of a mother who wanted me.
It came out why Ben's mother had handed him over when he was just 18 months old. According to Ben, she said she'd had painful whiplash following a car accident. No treatment was helping, and so she turned to yoga, which is where she met Anne Hamilton Byrne.
And Anne basically said to Joy, "Listen, Joy, I will heal you if you will serve me." Within 6 weeks, she was no longer bedridden. The symptoms really did dissipate. That was the signs and wonders that convinced my mother that Anne was the real deal, and she was fully committed, fully convinced.
And as a result, obviously, she ended up handing you over as a baby to Anne.
That's correct. And my mother made a promise that she would never involve herself in my life. Think of this, Anne's the reincarnation of Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ is saying, "I'm going to look after your child in an idyllic environment." When she made a promise to Anne, that was for life.
Now free, Ben found himself in a very different reality and at a new school. As you might imagine, it wasn't easy.
Traumatic. Within a couple of years, I was depressed. I was considering suicide. Often when you build a friendship with someone, you've got common grounds, common interests. I had none of that. So I was weird, struggling greatly in relationships with people at school. The nickname was Psycho.
And was that also because they'd heard about what you'd been through?
No, it was the way I reacted. Just the way I'd lash out. I was in the school locker room at one stage, and just basketball being, tossed around, happened to hit me on the back of the head, and I grabbed that in rage. Someone's hurt me. That wasn't an unusual response from me. So you're going to look at that going, wow, he's a psycho.
Ben was engulfed in a deep depression and couldn't make friends. But one day, a teacher had a conversation with him that proved to be a turning point.
He just said, "Listen, Ben, you don't have a head start in life. Most of these kids have known each other since grade 1. You're the Johnny-come-lately. It's going to take time. And you're going to have to learn how to relate to them, how to connect with them, and they're open to that, but the job's on you." But it really was an epiphanal moment for me. I know I've got issues, and I'm going to work through those, and I'm going to get a solution. So I really set myself then to analysing the world around me, what made life work as far as attitude towards jobs, how a family was going to work, all of those things. I really began investigating that.
Ben also found solace in religion and became a born-again Christian. From there, he did turn things around. He ended up working for the technology company IBM, he met his wife, and they've gone on to have 2 children. But there was something still unresolved in his life, his relationship with his mother. That would change thanks to chance.
So I had a very good relationship with my grandmother, and I would visit my grandmother. And my mother had come back from overseas, and she would always visit her mother. Well, we just happened to land at the same place at the same time. December, from memory, 2006. Chance meeting.
And what was it like? How did it go?
Surreal. So it was just chatting, "Who are you? This is who I am. Nice to see you." I introduced her to my kids, and it was, this chance happening has occurred. Let's stay in contact.
Did you forgive her?
I had already done that many years before. Forgiveness is letting go of the debt that someone owes us for when they've taken something from us. So by the time I met her, it wasn't an explosion of anger. It was very much a considered, "I've been forgiven, I'm willing to let you go of the debt."
Because your mother still had this sort of belief in the powers of Anne Hamilton Byrne, and you both went to see Anne in her nursing home together. Emotionally, what was that like for you, being there with your birth mother and with the woman that you grew up thinking was your mother?
When we went there, it was a very surreal experience. And on entry, the room was darkened. Anne was drifting in and out of sleep, and my mother got down on her knees beside her, put her face right near Anne's and began to speak very softly to her. Anne, it's Joy here. Anne woke up. Joy, dear, how are you? Great to see you. So she immediately recognised her. And then she looked past her and said, who's this man with you? And I said, oh, I'm her son. My name's Ben. Nice of you to come. So she had no recollection of who I was. By that stage, as she sort of got up and sat down in a chair, and my mum put this white blanket over her to keep her warm, made sure her slippers were on, I'm flicking through an album of pictures of my childhood. And Anne looks at me do this and just says, you're welcome to have that. Very interesting, she had no recognition of me, so yeah, that didn't cause me any problems.
Did that help you to just see her as a deeply flawed human being?
It only validated what I already knew. I knew she was deeply flawed. I'm now seeing what I knew in front of me.
Anne did die in June of this year. How did you feel when you found out?
I knew that she was probably beyond what we'd call repentance, a change of heart and a restoration and stuff, so I was just waiting for her to move on. A bit harsh here, I used to say, she just drop off the perch and do us all a favour. Literally within an hour or so, it being confirmed, the humorous side to me, the wicked witch is dead. The Wizard of Oz sort of bounced through my brain, and my wife at the time, good woman that she is, so that's a bit harsh. Quite concerned that I only had hatred towards her. I said, listen, dear, think of the damage she's done to people. I hold no ill will towards her. I'm not going to be dancing on her grave, but we can move on to this next phase.
Anne Hamilton Byrne never saw jail time. In fact, she was never charged with child abuse. Police say there wasn't enough physical evidence. She was fined $5,000 Australian for falsifying birth documents, but that's it. These days, Ben has contact with some of the other children freed from the cult.
We've all responded differently. Incredibly strong, empathetic, caring people to varying levels of damage and varying levels of success. And I consider myself one of the lucky ones, having held a marriage together we're not far off our 27th wedding anniversary, kids together. I've held a job down for 21 years, sit on boards of schools and other stuff. I consider myself very, very fortunate.
So tell me about that. What is your family life like now?
No one would know. My kids are very together, both head boy, head girl. Eldest daughter's gone on to uni. They've purchased their own car out of their own money. Well respected. My wife's an amazing woman. So I'm very blessed.
And how proud do you feel that you have been able to achieve that?
Yeah, there is a great element of joy and pride, and I look forward to headed towards the middle, towards the sunset years of life, of great relationship with my kids, looking forward to grandkids, and having a wonderful friendship and relationship with the love of my life. I'm a very, very blessed, happy man.
Survivor of the family cult, Ben Shenton. Thanks for downloading the Outlook podcast, and if you want to get your ears around something else, here's a recommendation.
That's me drinking millions of viruses.
Crowd Science is the podcast that takes your questions and turns them into audio adventures.
My question for Crowd Science is, why and when did humans first start cooking food?
It's all fun! I'm Marnie Chesterton, and each week we put your questions to scientists working at the limits of human knowledge.
I wanted to know how do they know what to do?
They're yanking on their neighbors, they're pushing on their neighbors.
We also try and demonstrate exactly what they're telling us.
What are the limits of human endurance?
You've just run a marathon and been hit by a car. How are you?
That's Crowd Science from the BBC World Service.
So if you'd like to inject a bit more science into that,
just search for Crowd Science wherever you get your podcasts.
I knew it! Amazing.